Hi, and welcome to RemnantWire Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Scholten-Adams, and I am so excited to be here today with a very good friend of mine. We're going to be discussing a very deep topic, one that comes with a lot of controversy, one that comes with a lot of pain, and one that comes with a lot of healing and restoration through Christ Jesus. This topic is something that is definitely emotionally sensitive and sometimes even triggering for some, but the objective of discussing the topics we have here on the program is so that you could be equipped, so you could be armed, so you could be in victory and not live life as a believer as a victim. That way you can go and do what God has called you to do, that you can be used to the fullest potential, laying down everything at the feet of the cross and marching forward with the marching orders as warriors for Christ as we are. Listen, you're here listening to RemnantWire Radio because you want uncensored biblical truth. You believe the church is struggling with trauma and addiction, sensationalism, and even the inability to break spiritual strongholds, and we just can't even defend our faith. So we believe here at RemnantWire, listen, we can't be inactive anymore. This is wartime Christianity, and our inaction needs to be combated through equipping the saints, through true discipleship and healing. The latter part of healing is what we're going to be talking about today through an amazing testimony of Tammy Windham. Tammy has been an amazing friend of mine for many years, who resides in Las Vegas, Nevada, who does amazing work for the Lord in various ways, dealing with post-abortive trauma and counseling and everything that encapsulates that really under the sun. So without further ado, Tammy, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. It's really awesome to be here. I know that even when you were talking about the introduction there and talking about the things, I just started thinking about we are in wartime Christianity, and we can't back down from these topics, because if we do, there's going to be more lives that are lost. And our goal here that God has placed us here for is to be a voice for him, to be a vessel that he can use in order to share who he is, so those lives are not lost. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely. You know, my heart is to make sure that we don't just leave the church floundering. We have a church right now, Tammy, that is truly just broken. And not only broken, almost they feel like ill-equipped, they're not educated, and as we know in the Word, it says, my people perish due to lack of knowledge. So not only do they not have knowledge, they can't even fight the battle due to extreme fatigue, and that comes from sins and mistakes and problems that we face in our past, even trauma from, childhood all the way through addiction. And so I'm glad to have you on, because I know that your testimony is going to reach the hearts of many people. And just the work that you do. We want to extend love and grace and mercy and healing and really show Christ's redemptive power so we could be equipped to fight this fight. So thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Why don't you give the audience a little bit about who is Tammy, and then we'll get into the meat of the amazing testimony that you have.
So my name's Tammy Windham. I feel like the best description of me is that I am a forgiven, saved child of God, that God has called me just to be transparent with the things of my life. And that's hard for some people, I know, to not just stuff everything down. But I don't have a problem speaking about it. God has given me freedom in that, so I'm thankful for that. And I have a wonderful husband, Ricky, who is a nurse, and he has been the best supportive person that I could even begin to imagine. I don't think I could have asked for anybody to be more supportive than Ricky is. So I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren that I just adore. So there's trauma in that as well. But and whenever you start talking about abortion, I think that some of that abortion aspect has led to some of that trauma, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, that's who I am. I'm a grandma that loves to be with her grandkids, a wife that loves her husband, and so thankful for that. And first and foremost, a child of God that's willing to be transparent with all of the things that I have done, my sin, and how God has saved me from that.
Amen. Now, we have all suffered from making mistakes in our life as a woman of God, and even as a man of God, if you're listening. At some point, even in your walk, you make a mistake. We all sin. There's times that we are really crucifying our flesh and trying to lay our sins and our addictions and our struggles before Jesus. And then there's times we feel like we're succeeding more than others. But I think the point is that as we tackle this topic of abortion, we want to have you understand that no sin is above another. Nobody's past is better or more righteous than anybody others. Nobody's future is more righteous or better. Where all of our righteousness is as filthy rags before the Lord. We are sinners who are broken, who are trying to do what God has called us to do. And he ultimately uses us, the broken people, to, carry out his calling. He doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And leading from that statement, I really would love you to just give your testimony to these women and these men who are listening on this program about how Tammy Windham became the woman of God that you are now, and what you currently are doing with your calling and through your pain and through your trauma. So I just want to hand the microphone to you, and I just want you to bare your soul to the audience right now, because I know that we are broken. And there's somebody out there who needs to hear how the Lord has redeemed, restored, rejuvenated you in your walk with him. So take the wheel, Tammy.
Thank you. I think the best place to always start is in the beginning. God started there because if it's good enough for him, it's definitely good enough for me.
Amen.
So I am a child of teen parents. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 15 years old. And in 1963, so now you know how old I am. In 1963, abortion was not something that was legal at the time. And my dad was 19, and so they did what they thought was right. They got married, and I totally agree with that to some degree, but things just didn't work out well in that. And so by the time I was 6 months old, when I was born and I was 6 months old, I ended up going to live with my maternal grandparents. My mom and dad divorced. My mom was a party animal. My dad was as well, and they split their ways. And so I spent the first 11 years of my life living with my maternal grandparents. I bring that up because, especially during that time period, there weren't a lot of single parents around, or there weren't a lot of kids living with grandparents that people talked about. It was like kept behind closed doors. And so it was almost a stigma if you didn't have this happy, leave it to beaver lifestyle. And so when I was in school, the kids used to give me a really bad time. I didn't have a whole lot of friends because they were like, what's wrong with you that your parents don't want you? And so I started very early, from being dropped off with my grandparents to the kids, Satan started building this sense of rejection. And so I call it a stain of rejection. I call all of these stains, they're life stains that you have to work through, that God can wash clean. And so, but that was the first stain that I remember in my life, is the rejection from people. And so when I was 8 years old, I went to a vacation Bible school at a little Baptist church that was really close to my house. And I would walk there, and I just had so much fun at Vacation Bible School. And my grandmother would tell me Bible stories, but she was not an avid churchgoer. She was a believer, but she was not walking in that faith. But so she was 100% on board with me going to Vacation Bible School. And so when that was over, I just wanted to keep going, because people there seemed to have a little more compassion on me than the kids at school. Well, when I was 9, and I was in church, and I finally got enough nerve to go to big church, as we called it, into the sanctuary where the pastor was preaching. And so I go in there, and the whole story in Sunday school that morning had been more about, how much Jesus wants to be your friend and how he loves you. And I didn't have a whole lot of friends. And so when I went into big church, the pastor started talking about that. And he was talking about how, that's really the only way to have a relationship with God, was to have Jesus as your friend. And that's what he wants. And I mean, from somebody that didn't have friends, even as I think about it now, I get emotional all over again, because I remember sitting on that back row in that church thinking, oh my gosh, here's a real friend, somebody that really wants to be my friend. And so I went running up that aisle whenever they had the altar call. And I talked to the pastor. I was 9 years old, and he just really wasn't sure that I knew what I was talking about. But the more I told him, the more he agreed. And so That afternoon, he came to my house and talked to my grandparents. And I remember the conversation well. They questioned me, about what I was really doing and did I understand? And I did. And he said, well, I think, the next step that we need to do is you need to be baptized. He said, if you want, we can do it tonight at tonight's service. And I said, that would be awesome. I would love that. And so we walked through that and I was baptized that night. So I truly believe that my salvation was right then, that when I accepted the Lord then, I believe I was sealed at that moment. What is so ironic about that day is that it was January 21st, 1973. It was the day before Roe v. Wade was passed. I'm not trying to say that Roe v. Wade was all about me, but I believe that God was protecting me. I could look at this from the sense that Satan is already trying to trip me up, but I don't believe that. I believe God was already protecting me. He was sealing me to let me know that I was going to be okay in the end. So just kind of fast forward there a little bit. After the salvation, and this is what I find is one of the biggest problems that I run into in the churches, is they get you to that point that you accept the Lord, but where's the discipleship? There is none.
And I'm going to interject there before you continue real quick, because you said that's a big problem that you have. And I agree 110%. One of the biggest issues I have with these mass revivals, and I love people like Greg Laurie and their ministry. I love what they're doing, but they do. I mean, I used to go to Harvest Crusades as a kid in Southern California. I absolutely loved it. They tell them, hey, go out to these other churches in your area and there's maybe like a few booths, but it's almost impossible, right, to disciple and follow up with these people. And if we truly had these thousands of people doing these mass revivals, 50,000 people, every single harvest revival or every single crusade, every single summer, California would look a lot different. That's the only thing I wanted to interject there. Go ahead with the rest of your story.
Boy, would it look different. And it definitely does not look like that right now. So because of the lack of discipleship, I just started sliding away. There was nothing to keep me tied there to teach me what that meant, that there was any steps. So here I was. I felt like a kid that had a ticket to heaven now. And this friend that I had been promised was nowhere to be found because I didn't understand how to have a relationship with him. So I felt like I'd been rejected again, that this friend didn't want me either. And then I just didn't know what to do with all of those feelings and emotions. I decided the best thing for that at 11 years old, I decided that the way to fix this is just go live with my mom. Then, if I go live with my mom, then I won't have these people rejecting me anymore, because I'll be with my mom. And as I said, my mom was definitely a party animal. I begged for a while, and my grandparents finally agreed. My mom agreed. And at this time, my mom had already had two more children. One was living with her biological father, and then she had my youngest sister with her. So I went to go live with them and learned very quickly how to party. It was just, you're following your mom around thinking, okay, this is what I need to do. So I was
And you want that acceptance. You wanted that. You wanted to feel part of something. So you're obviously going to assimilate to that environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just was putting myself in some very risky situations. And my mom, I think she saw that and she was maybe feeling like she needed to do something different. I don't know. We moved back to Midland, where I was from, and closer to my grandparents. And when we went back to school, oh my gosh, I went back to the same school I'd been at before, but I had my mom. And so I thought, oh, they're going to accept me now. No, they started a rumor because I was gone for like 7 months. And they started a rumor that I had left because I was pregnant and went to have a baby. I hadn't even hit puberty, much less had a baby.
Kids are wicked. I mean,
they are, but it's coming from what they hear, and that's what they're taught, And so I think it's another thing that we have to think about, is because what we teach our children is what they are going to mimic, what they're going to say, what they're going to do. And so I'm not trying to put any blame on anybody else, because this is what was going on inside of me. Instead of me seeking the truth, I was seeking acceptance. And so I continued to put myself in risky situations, especially with kids being that way and stuff. And there was a Christmas party that my grandparents and my mom were at for the business that they owned. And so they had me stay with a family friend, and this family friend had a 16-year-old son, and the 16-year-old son and his friend that was spending the night raped me that night. I remember all too well just trying to scream, trying to find help, trying to figure out what to do. And all I could think about was, the fact that now if I tell anybody this, it's going to be another form of rejection. They're going to just tell
Mm.
me that I deserved it, because I put myself in all these risky situations. And so I just didn't feel like I could tell anybody. But there was like this light switch, I guess you could say, went off instead of on, but that I was like, well, this is what they want. This is
Mm.
how to be accepted. So I'm like, so maybe sex is where I'm supposed to get this acceptance. At 13 years old, that was my mindset. I'm like, okay, this will be all right. And so I had a boyfriend, and I didn't tell him about what had happened, but he was not willing to kind of go down that road. So it didn't take long before I was done with him, because I'm like, well, he doesn't want me, so why am I here? And
Mm.
but I became very promiscuous, looking for somebody that was that way. And by the time I was 15, I had a boyfriend that we were extremely sexually active, and so I mean, I felt accepted. I felt like somebody wanted me. And then after about 9 months, we broke up, and I had no earthly idea why. And at the time, I didn't. I just know that I was not a good person to be around. I mean, I was a very needy person. So when we broke up, I had a friend that she had broken up with her boyfriend, but I was really good friends with her boyfriend. And we were talking one night, and next thing you know, it ended up in sex. I
Yeah.
can't even tell you how it got there, but it ended up in sex. About 3 weeks later, I was throwing up. I couldn't understand why I was throwing up, and I took a pregnancy test, and here I was, 16 and pregnant.
Mm.
And I'm like, all I could think about was my mom when she was 16. And now, how am I going to deal with this? And I got to tell her that I made the same mistakes that she made. But when I went to my mom, she said, you know what? She said, I get it. I get it. She goes, and I am here to support you no matter what you decide. Those words, I know women hear those all the time, because when I talk to women that have been in the same kind of sexual sin, those words are the most indirect support there is. I'll support you in whatever you want. They
Mm.
don't say, no, this is what you need to do, let me help you, let me help you find the right path. It's like, whatever you decide, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
So it's not the right thing to say, in my opinion. I think that you need to give direction when you say that. So my mom's stipulation, she had one stipulation. She said, you have to tell your grandparent. I said, oh, I can do this, so okay, I'm pregnant, I need to just tell them. They supported me for 11 years. They were my rock for 11 years. They'll be there to support me through this too. And so when I went to tell them, my grandmother lost it. Her words to me were, if you have this baby, I never want to see you again.
Why do you think her response was so intense and emotionally charged? Obviously, we know the logical reason would be, you're 16 and pregnant, but what was behind that, do you think?
I think it's because she saw what my mom had done and what my mom had been through, and she saw more potential in me than quitting school and, getting married, or, I think she saw it as a detriment to my life, opposed, there's a life involved. She was looking at what my future would be. And she was looking at what her responsibility was going to be in that. And she wasn't willing to face that again.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was some selfishness in it, but I think there was also some concern for what I was going to look like. And I will also tell you that at that time, I mean, she was very pro-abortion. And it's because of the verbiage and the crap that they were told when abortion was made legal. She said, it's just a product of conception. That's all it is. It's not a baby yet.
Yeah.
It's
and that's
just
when the lie, the lie began that way, right? As we all know.
Yeah.
It's a clump of cells. It's okay to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like removing a wart, it's not a life, And so I didn't see any way that I could live without my grandparents. And so I told my mom, I said, I can't do this. I can't be without them. So instead of leaning into God, had I had any discipleship at all, I would have known I could have leaned into God and I could have stood on his promises. But I didn't know that at the time. And I know that a lot of people are faced with the same thing. Even believers, they have such little faith in the fact that God is going to be there through the trials that they look to man, just like I did, for the answers for that. And when man's going to reject them, then they're like, oh, I can't do it.
Yeah.
They don't care if it's not against what God says.
Yeah.
So, and I get it, because people with flesh on seem to have a little bit more pull in our lives at times than God, who is a spirit that lives within us. I just think that that's part of the problem. So my mom called Planned Parenthood, and within 2 days, I was in there having an abortion, and they were so nice to me. Oh, this is just a minor procedure. It won't take long. It'll be just like having an annual exam. And I'm like, what's an annual exam? I've never had an annual exam. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And said, oh, okay, well, here's what it is. And, they just made it sound like it was just so simple. I was like, okay, this will be fine. Very loving, very caring, or at least it felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was waiting for me whenever I came out. When I came out, we had about a 20-mile drive home. And I remember walking out that door and feeling like, even now, that feeling when I walked out that door, I was like, you are a horrible person. You just did something so dramatic and so drastic just to get somebody to like you. You are horrible. I mean, that was the first thought out of my mouth the minute that I walked out. And I was just like, I can't do this. And it was just, my mind started swimming and I was nauseous, and I'm in the car with my mom and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, Mom. And she said, I get it. I understand. I've been there. First time I knew that my mom had had an abortion.
Do you believe that up until this point that there were generational sins that you were reliving unaware, right? And it was manifesting through the condemnation and the rejection and the shame, which led to your insecurity, which led to codependency from you desiring and wanting these relationships and being codependent on these relationships because you had nothing, no solid foundation yet in Jesus. Was this,
Absolutely.
Do you believe that this was just generational sin and you were walking it out?
100%. I think that when the enemy gets a foothold in any area, that he can continue to disrupt even the life of a believer, because anybody that believes that Satan has no impact on you as a believer is believing a lie. Because Satan, that's his biggest thing, is if he can trip up a believer, then that can trigger where people will never become a believer because they're like, well, look at you. Why would I want to be like you?
Yeah.
And so it's just a vicious cycle right there. And yes, I definitely believe that it was a generational sin. And I don't believe that it was on my grandmother's part as much as far as the sexual aspect of it. But the abortion aspect of it, my grandmother was 100% pro-abortion. I found out later that she had paid for an abortion for an affair that my granddad had. There's so many things that go back to that I can see why she was so avid to be, that's the decision, because it'll make it go away and we can move on, kind of thing. And it doesn't go away. It doesn't just go away. There is so much trauma afterwards. And I was trying to deal with that trauma at 16. And you don't have enough mental capacity at 16 anyway to deal with some of the critical situations in life. Your brain is just not mature enough to begin with. And so without good counsel around you from the adults around you, it just snowballs into more and more garbage. And my garbage I was like, I can't do this. I can't stand the feeling that I'm having. And I need to feel good. I need to feel better. So I turned to drugs and alcohol, which is a very common thing for post-abortive women. But being drunk and high all the time, you get more promiscuous, So
you were trying to cover that shame you felt. The enemy, the moment you walked out that door, was just condemning you, and it was spilling out of your mouth. It was circling in your mind, right? He had known. And when we talk about these generational sins, people are like, well, Satan's not omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, but he has a band of principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness that are. They live through generation, and there's demonic attachments that people have, and there's oppressive attachments. And that's how these generational curses continue to piggyback on our children. And He knew the moment you came out, that's exactly where he wanted you, right? And so he was like, I got her. He thought he was going to thwart the plan of the Lord from that 8-year-old girl to the 16-year-old girl. You spiraled, right? Because you had no foundation, and he had you hooked, by the jaw. And now you're trying to cover that emotional pain through escaping through
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol and sex, right? Because that's what happens.
Oh,
We just
yeah.
keep going to what the problem was, like a dog returns to his vomit, right? We just keep returning,
Right.
not even knowing what we're doing.
Exactly. That is exactly what it is. And the thing about it is, because people think about, when you think about sex in a worldly manner, people do it out of pleasure. And not that it's not a pleasurable thing, but they do it. That's the sole reason they're doing it. It's for self pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that is honoring or glorifying to God in a marriage relationship like it should be. It is self pleasure in this world, So, I mean, between the hookups and all those kind of things that are going on that people are just having, and I'm just trying to make our kids have sex. I'm just like, that just infuriates me when I see some of the things that are happening in our school systems and the way they're infiltrating that into our kids. It just infuriates me. But I digress. I'm going to go back to my story because I could go on for hours on that one because I care about my grandkids so much and what's being put in front of them. Here I was on drugs and alcohol and just being extremely promiscuous. And by the time I was 18, I was in the same boat again. Here I was pregnant again. Well, this time I'm so desensitized to any morality of any kind by this point that I'm just like, oh, I can do this. So I called the same doctor. His name's Dr. Oschlager, and he was in Odessa, Texas. I will never forget this. I called his office and I'm like, I need to come in for an abortion. And they're like, okay, they scheduled me. And this was like night and day from the first time to the second time. When I walked in the second time, it was like, you're a repeat offender. You know the drill. So, we don't have to baby you through this, So they've got you. They've learned how to, or they've taught you how to be their money machine, because that's what this is all about, is murder for money. I get in there. There's no talking to me about anything. The doctor will be in a minute. Here, get undressed. The doctor will be here in a minute. You know what's going to happen, kind of attitude. And so I get in there. He does the abortion. And he says to me, he says, okay, we're done. And, when you're ready, you can get up. Now, I don't know. I hear people talk about the sedation and things they had. I was not sedated at all. It was just like having an annual exam, and they opened it up. They sucked it out. I could hear the suction. I could hear it all. I knew what was going on. But he left the room, and I turned and I looked, and the canister with my aborted baby was right there. They had not taken it out of the room where they normally take it out of the room because they have to go check all the stuff and everything. And I looked at that and literally I broke. I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I here? What has possessed me to be to this point? So I left there as quick as I could and went home. I drove myself home. I didn't have a driver. They didn't require a driver, nothing. And so I drove myself home, and I cried and I cried and I cried. And it's like, you can't cry enough.
Yeah.
It's like I just couldn't get it out. But I wasn't crying to the Lord. I didn't know to cry to the Lord. So from that point on, I made a decision that I am so filthy, I am so terrible that God doesn't even want me. I can't even cry out to him. Why would he want me? I am a murderer. I can't do this.
Yeah, there's that shame and condemnation that the enemy was just he was just piling it on like layers of an onion, right? He was just hitting you.
I kind of calmed down on some of my activities that I was doing at the time, kind of focused on working and stuff. And I was able to move out on my own. And I wasn't on my own. I had a roommate, and the roommate that I had, she wanted to go out one night. So we went out, and I met this guy. He was so accepting and wanted me so bad, and so we spent some time together, and within 3 weeks, he's asking me to marry him. And I'm like, well, I probably should jump on this, because who else is going to want me? I mean, after all the things that I've done, who else is going to want me? And so I did. I jumped on the bandwagon and got married. I was just like, I had no sense of understanding of what marriage was about or anything. And so I got married, and within 2 weeks after we got married, I got my first beating.
Oh.
He was extremely physically and mentally abusive. But, I think that I hear this a lot from post-abortive women, that they allow the enemy or people to continue to abuse them because of the beatdown that they have gotten from the abortion. So it's not uncommon
No, they don't
for
have any
women
love
to,
for themselves.
exactly. There's no concern for this. It's just whatever you got to do to survive.
Yeah.
And I would take any amount of acceptance that I could get, even if it was a teaspoon here or a teaspoon there. So I took the beatings. We got married on Valentine's Day. How crazy is that? But
Yeah.
I guess it was by May, I guess I was pregnant. Chase, my son was born in June. I mean, not in June, I'm sorry, in January. But I went through beatings through my entire pregnancy. And every time that I thought I got to get out of here, he would tell me that if I tried to leave, he would kill me and my baby both. And I knew as long as I was pregnant that that was possible. I had made a decision that when I found out I was pregnant, I'm like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect this life because I have destroyed two others. I cannot do this again.
Yeah.
And so I just knew that I would wait until Chase was born and then I would leave. Well, when Chase was a week old, things seemed to be better with him. He seemed to be happy and stuff. So I thought, well, this is going to be okay. And he got drunk. And when he got drunk that night, I mean, I got a beating that I had never had before. He slammed me down on a chair and busted my episiotomy open. And that was it. I was like done. I was done. And so I sat there and I said, when you pass out, I'm gone. And he goes, you'll pass out before I do, but from lack of blood. And I said, well, I guess that'll be okay too. So when he passed out, I pushed the vehicle out of the driveway because I didn't want the motor sound to wake him up because he was asleep by a window that was close to that. Pushed it out and drove down the street to the grocery store, called my mom and asked her to come get me because at that time we didn't have cell phones. She came and I stood by the door or the window of Chase's room just so I could hear if he cried. And she came and brought the cops. They helped me get out of there. They took me to the hospital. And the doctor, as he was sewing up my episiotomy, he said, where are you going when you leave here? And I said, well, I'm going to my mom's. And he's like, yeah, right. He said, sure you are. He says, you're going to go back there. And he said, just so you know, you'll be dead by morning when you do. I know, it was just so traumatic. But at the same time, it was like a wake-up call.
Yeah, but gosh, like I'm sorry. I'm sitting here on the other end of the microphone like, what? I mean, he must have seen this more often than you and I want to, like, probably admit. And he was either being used by God or...
Absolutely.
That's a pretty intense statement to make as a physician. I mean, I'm not saying it was wrong, but wow.
Well, here's the thing. Sometimes it takes something that drastic to get your attention, and God will use whatever it takes to get your attention.
Ain't that the truth?
Sometimes you just need a slap with a word or two to wake up to what's going on. And so it really did. It woke me up, and I went to my mom's. I filed for divorce, and I decided I was going to get my life straight. I didn't want this anymore. I didn't want to deal with that stuff anymore. So here I had a baby that I was responsible for, and so I was going to be a mom, and I would be a single mom, and I will do life, whatever I got to do. And it was a wake-up call for me, and I was really glad that it was. I mean, there were times that over the next year that Satan really tried to trip me up, but I just wasn't having it. Not that I was turning to God yet then either, but I had a friend that it was her birthday, and they invited me to go out with them. So my grandmother was watching my baby, believe it or not. My grandmother was watching my baby, and I went out with them to a bar. And I met this guy, and I was like, I have no desire whatsoever to have a relationship with anybody. And it came his birthday. And so, which was January 10th. My son was almost a year old, and it was January 10th on this guy's birthday. I went to the birthday party. It was out dancing. I met his best friend, which I had not met before, and danced with him all night long, his best friend. That man is Ricky Windham, my husband today. God brought Ricky that night. Ricky called his friend and said, hey, is it okay if I call Tammy? And he's like, yeah, whatever, and gave him my phone number. And Ricky called, are you ready for this? Yeah. On Valentine's Day.
Oh my gosh.
On Valentine's Day. To ask me for the first date. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess. And we had our first date on a week later on the 21st of February. And I mean, I had no intention of ever getting married again, but Ricky was so caring, so kind, so loving, so persistent. So on September 20th of that same year, we got married.
Wow.
And have been married ever since. That was in 1986. 38 years. Here's the great part of that. God was working in all of that because we got married in the church with our family and friends. Ricky took me back to church, showed me what it was to be a family that attends church and to learn discipleship, to grow in the Lord. Ricky was the biggest encouragement in that. And so I was really thankful for that. But I never told Ricky my past. I had not told him. I mean, he knew about Chase, but he didn't know about the abortion. We hadn't been married very long, and I found out I was pregnant. And, we're all excited. I have the first time I've truly been excited going to the doctor when I was pregnant. And we lived about 50 miles from where the doctor was. And, we're just all the way there. We're like, can't wait. I don't know if they'll do an ultrasound, just all this excitement. And we get there and the nurse is doing her thing, checking my blood pressure and everything. And she looks at me and she goes, now this is your 4th pregnancy, right? And Ricky's looking at me, shaking his head like, no. And I'm looking him in the eye and I said, yes, it is. And the look on his face, his whole countenance fell. And I thought, I'm going to be divorced before tomorrow. It's just, this is going to be over. My joy is going to be over. Nothing was said during the office visit, obviously, but on that way home, that was the longest drive home I've ever had in my life.
I could only imagine.
Yeah. So, but that's just it. When we start hiding the things of our past and not being transparent with them and letting God use the things of our past, they get stuffed down like that, and Satan will snatch them up in a hurry and just let the whole world know what it is so that you can be put to shame again, because that's exactly what he was doing. I had to explain all of it to Ricky on the way home, and I kept waiting for him to kick me out of the car. But God.
Yeah.
But God, Ricky was such a blessing. He had so much compassion and so much care that he forgave me. I know it was hard for him, bless his heart. I know it was hard for him, but he's like, it's okay. It's going to be okay. And he walked me through that. He loved me anyway. It was the first time in my life that I felt like somebody loved me anyway. All that to say that, Ricky got me back in church. Chelsea was born and we were very avid in church and things, and we moved to Las Vegas. We were living in Texas. We moved to Las Vegas, and Ricky had found us a little Baptist church that we were going to. I'm very happy there, and I was sitting in the choir. I believe it or not, don't even ask how that happened. Ricky and I both were in the choir, and I'm sitting in the choir one day, and and so I bring this up for a very specific reason. But I'm singing in the choir, and I have no idea what the sermon's going to be about that day or what's going to happen or anything, and so I'm in this choir loft and we get done singing and I sit down, I'm worshiping the Lord, and I sit down and this skit starts in front of me. The skit is about abortion. I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, the entire audience can see me. If I blink, if I move, everybody in this church is going to know exactly what I have done.
There's that shame and that guilt and that condemnation creeping back up.
Yeah. So I just okay. So I put my hands under my thighs and I sat there and I said, just don't breathe. Just don't breathe. Don't breathe. And when the skit was over, they talked about where you could go to get abortion help and everything. And one of the ladies in the church, I saw her talking to the lady after. So I went up to her and I was like, hey, did you find out where to go? And she goes, oh yeah, I counseled there. And so she told me about the Women's Resource Center. I was like, okay. So I went. And I went through, she took me through the counseling, Forgiven and Set Free. And I was like, oh my gosh, God has so much hope and can use this. And so now there's the freedom in this that I don't have to live under all this anymore. That's what I learned from that. But I'm like, I'm still not okay to share this with anybody. I don't want to tell everybody. The church was having a women's event that I helped with the women's ministry. They came to me and asked me if I would share on this particular, the topic was SHAPE, and it was an acronym, and I had the E, and they wanted me to talk about experiences. And God was like, you need to tell them. You got to tell them. And I'm like, no. But I did. And so I'll kind of wrap this up a little bit. But as I went to this women's event that was in Utah, I couldn't go home. I had to stay there. I cried through the whole thing. I shared my story. And as I shared my story among these women that I thought were going to take me out back and stone me after I told them all this, which is a lie from the pit of hell.
Yep.
they lined up to love on me.
Oh,
And
man.
that's when I began to learn how many women in the church are affected by abortion. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore. We have got to do something about this. This has to stop. And they need to know that there is healing. And so somebody came from the Women's Resource Center to the congregation that I was at, and they were talking about, all the hope there is in abortion and all this stuff. And I was like, yes, yes, I need to counsel there. I need to be there. I need to tell these girls not to do this. And so that's how I got involved in the center. And from that moment on, I really knew that God was calling me to do more. So he took me through about a year and a half of working at the center. I quit my job, went to work at the center. And then after I left there in 2008, about a year later, the center called me asking if I would share my testimony at a women's event. And I went to that women's event and I shared my testimony just as I've shared with you today and told them the story. And there was a lady in the room that the moment I said that I'd had an abortion, she jumped up and ran to the bathroom. And the bathroom door was adjacent to that room. I could see the door from where I was speaking. And when I was sharing that, all I could think about was her behind that door and how desperate she seemed. And so I knew that I just had to let God speak hope.
Yeah.
So I totally abandoned my agenda of what it was that I was going to say, and I let God say whatever he wanted to say. And I mean, my story still came out, but there was so much hope that came out in it. And after that, I got done, and the women there just kind of lined up to talk to me, but she was one of the first ones. And she shared with me that she had just had an abortion a couple of weeks before, and she was just so devastated. And it took me a bit, but I talked to her for a long time about that there is healing and that she didn't have to live under this condemnation. And I tell you that because so many women live the life that I lived for so long, living under the condemnation of it, that they don't seek hope. And so many things in our world right now, that this battle that is going on about abortion, there's the pro-choice side, or the pro-abortion side, I guess I should say, opposed to the pro-life side. And they want to battle about who's right and whose body and all these things. Well, my heart is, who is in control of life? Yeah. Satan cannot create life. Satan cannot create life. God is the creator of life. God is the one that breathes the breath of life into that womb. So if God creates something, he has a plan and a purpose for it. Mm-hmm. And I don't care who you are, whether you're a believer or not, who are you to decide what that person is going to do or not do by taking the life of that child? And so I believe that the battle comes back to the fact that we have to look at where the breath of life comes from, allow the breath of life to be spoken. And if it can't speak for itself, then we need to be the voice speaking for it.
Yeah.
So, we don't have to live under this condemnation. And those people that are so pro-abortion, either they have been down that road and they're living under the condemnation, and they don't know how to get out of it, and they're trying to make themselves feel better.
They're trying to justify it, right? So that they don't have to deal with the emotion of the pain of abortion.
Yeah. And so I encourage anybody, I don't care if you're a believer or you're not a believer and you're listening to this, I encourage you, if you have had an abortion, go talk to somebody that has found healing after.
Yeah.
Go talk to somebody so that you can find out that this is not something that you have to justify. This is not, God is a God of love and grace and mercy. And it doesn't matter what the sin is. Sin is sin in God's eyes. All of it requires the same blood to be saved from that sin. The price to be paid, there is one price, and that's Jesus' blood covers all sin, whether it is abortion or if it's stealing a pin. Amen. It is all covered under the blood of Christ. So you are no different from the person that has grown up in the church and has never had an abortion or whatever, that has lived this what looks like perfect life, which it is not, I will tell you. But you are no different than that person. And God loves you just as much as that person. There is no measure of God's love. He loves everyone exactly the same. He can't love you more if you do better or love you less if you do worse. He loves you beyond what you could ever understand. And that is what you have to understand in order to find the hope and the healing, is that he loves you that much and he will save you from all of that.
When you look at the sincerity and the pain that comes with abortion, there's the severity, I should say, is so intense, the emotional damage that's done. There's only two ways to handle it. You either close it off and you emotionally detach, and you do become one who justifies and rallies behind the sin, because that's your way of covering and licking your own wounds. Right. And I truly believe those people who don't have the Lord, who double down on it, have truly still experienced that trauma and that suffering and that pain, but they just don't want to come to the realization of dealing with it. So they masquerade behind it being a good thing, an appropriate thing, a healthy thing. When it's a destructive thing, it's a painful thing. And you experienced that at a very young age. You experienced walking out of that first abortion, feeling condemnation and shame. If it was truly good, and let's just say we go by logic of the liberal, that believe that what, we know from biblical standard, they think what's good is evil and what's evil is good, right? We know that they're flip-flopping things, but let's just say that what they truly think is good, then there should not be the shame and the guilt and the condemnation or the quote-unquote conviction that occurs when you walk out of that room. If it truly was good, then none of those negative emotions would come up, right? So we have to look at that and say, inherently, our spirit, as we're created in the divine image of God, whether we accept him or not, if we're walking in sin in the flesh or if we're walking in the spirit, if we're saved or if we're not saved, there was a conviction that turned into condemnation, because without Jesus Christ, conviction is condemnation. Because in Jesus, there's no condemnation. But there is conviction, which is for the betterment of the brethren, for us to turn from our ways so we can be sanctified and be more like him. But when we don't have that, it turns into condemnation. Condemnation snowballs into shame, which snowballs into guilt. And all from the trauma and the pain of the inherent sin, right? Trying to cover our sin like Adam and Eve tried to cover their nakedness. That's that snowball ripple effect that took place. So they rally behind the sin because of shame. That you go one way or the other, and you came out of the other end years later, though walking a traumatic road, though walking a road riddled with the rejection and that pain of being rejected and shame and guilt and from the trauma and a drug addiction and abuse and sex and codependency, all of these things that weighed your spirit down. God took all things. He did have you covered from 8 years old, right? And he took all things that you experienced and turned them into good for the glory of his kingdom, where now you can do and use this testimony to minister to the women and the men who are so broken, who didn't have a say in the matter, right? Because I know that there's a lot of post-abortive men. I call them post-abortive men. No, men can't have babies and abort their children. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they come from the relationship and they suffer with tremendous emotional pain from those decisions, right? And there is healing and redemption. So what are some of the resources and the counseling that we can offer the listenership to help them cope and heal from any decisions they've made in their past? Because Jesus wants nothing more than to restore and redeem them, right? And to heal them.
Right. Well, the first thing that I would say is most crisis pregnancy centers will have some sort of healing ministry that they do, whether it be a Bible study that they do that helps walk you through that healing process. The one that I went through there was called Forgiven and Set Free. Or you can always go online, and there is one for the men as well that's called Forgotten Fathers. And I think that those things are very pertinent because it's going through scripture and walking you through, it's walking through the process. Yes, there's some reliving of the process, but I feel like sometimes we have to kind of relive some of those things in order for us to recognize where we took the wrong turn, where we ended up following Satan instead of following God. And then at some of those intersections, some of those crossroads, there is where God will meet you and show you ways that he has given you a way out that maybe you ignored at that time. And now you know you have the tools behind you in order to make better decisions. So that's part of the healing process. The other part of it is being able to apply his word as a healing salve over that, because of his grace and his mercy that comes out through his word. If he can take Paul, who used to be Saul, that murdered Christians right and left, and turn him into the man that wrote half of the New Testament, what can he do with you? Yeah. You know what I mean? That's kind of the way that I look at it, because Paul was a great murderer. I mean, he hated Christians. He hated anybody that talked about Jesus, and Jesus got a hold of him. From that, he learned, and Paul could have lived in the condemnation of what he had done and just crawled in a hole and lived under all of that condemnation, but he didn't. He didn't allow Satan to win. He allowed God to speak to his life and be a voice through his life in order for God's glory to shine. And I believe that's what God does. And I am certainly not a Paul, and I don't claim to be in any sense. I don't claim to be eloquent with words or anything like that. But God called me to write down my testimony as well. And when he did, and I put it in a book form, it's Lessons from Life Stains. And so all of this story is wrapped up in there with a lot more. And when you brought up about the men being post-abortive as well, I won't go into the full story, but I will tell you that my son is post-abortive as well. That happened through church. He was dating a music minister's daughter, and they had sex outside of marriage. She got pregnant, and the music minister sent her for an abortion. I tell you that because people think this all happens outside of the church. If you're in church, this won't happen to you, and that is so not true.
No, I mean, just to confirm that, there's things that I've done as a believer, walking with the Lord, actively going to church when I was younger, that I dealt with the shame and the guilt of for many years, not abortive issues, but just sexual sin, sexual immorality coming from the same thing, rejection and seeking approval and codependency. And also severe manipulation that I'm subject to, especially when it comes to men in general, when I was younger, not now, but it was very painful. And I dealt with a lot of guilt and condemnation, and the church didn't know in some ways how to help me with a lot of things through that. But, we all fall short of the glory of God. We all sin. We all miss the mark. But there is healing and there is redemption. And if you are saved, Jesus doesn't want you holding on to that pain and that burden. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, right? The weight that we carry in our shame and guilt is heavier than just giving it to him, right? And there's healing in that. And there's freedom in that. And though he's a just God, he's a forgiving God. He's a loving God. He's a compassionate God. He's a God of long suffering. And so we definitely need to remember that as we walk forward in our walk with Jesus Christ. And when things like that happen in the church that are disgusting, we need to remember that they are also sinners saved by grace, who are also making decisions that are horrible, and they need redemption and restoration and prayer as well.
My very favorite biblical person is David, King David.
Oh, yeah.
And I can so relate to him in so many ways. But one of the things that blesses me the most is David danced before the Lord. David loved the Lord. God says he's a man after God's own heart. That's what God said about David. David did exactly the same thing that we did in a little bit different form. I mean, he was not where he was supposed to be. He was on the roof of his castle looking down, sees Bathsheba. If he would have been out to war where he was supposed to be, that never would have happened. He was in a place he shouldn't have been. He was looking at something he shouldn't have been looking at. And because of the fact that he did that, ended up having relations with her, having a baby, and killing her husband. He caused murder for a baby, just like we did. He caused murder for a baby. But yet God still called him a man after his own heart. To me, that is one of the biggest things that struck me when I was going through my healing process, was that if God could call David a man after his own heart, he could call me a woman after his own heart for what I had done. I'm really glad God doesn't write scripture anymore, because I'm afraid I would be in a lot of books. But that's what the Bible's for, is for us to understand who he is and how he works and what he does with the filthy of us. He makes that filthiness better. And it's only by God's grace, and it's only by his son, that all of that goes away. And so for anyone that maybe doesn't know the Lord, and you're living in that, and you're like, there's nothing for me with God. Yes, there is. You just don't know what it is yet, because you haven't experienced it. You're just like David up there on that roof, looking at something that you think is pleasant. But whenever it came down to where the rubber met the road, and God had to deal with David and his sin in that, and David came humble before the Lord, God restored him in so many different ways. Yes, the baby was gone and the baby died in the process, but God built him up to so much. He made him into who he was, as King David became the guarder of our faith. He was the guarder of the scripture. He was the Jewish families were the guarder of the scripture, so that we as Gentiles could even know who God was.
And I'm just so grateful for your testimony. I know we're out of time, but I'm so grateful for your testimony and what you've gone through, and just the spirit and the message of redemption and healing. Because so many people need it, and it's so applicable in many other areas of our lives, many other sins that we've committed, many other pains that we carry. So, I just want to say, if you are struggling, if you have any pain, if you need prayer, if you are post-abortive and you need resources, if you go to RemnantWireRadio.com, I'm going to find some links here to Forgiven and Set Free. There'll be some links in this broadcast for Forgotten Fathers. Is there a link to your book, Tammy, Lessons from Life Stains?
It's actually on Amazon. It is on Amazon.
We'll make sure we have an Amazon link, so if you're interested in that book, you can purchase that book. If you have questions, if you need prayer, email Brandon at RemnantWireRadio.com. He's the pastor over the ministry, and obviously he's my amazing husband. He'll be able to assist you. He has also worked at Women's Resource Medical Centers of Southern Nevada, along with myself in that pregnancy center, so we are all boots on the ground for this specific topic and struggle. So we all can identify with you. If you're a woman and you don't want to email Pastor Brandon, you can feel free to email me, Shannon at RemnantWireRadio.com. And if you came in part at the end of this program and you want to hear the whole program, go to RemnantWireRadio.com to the media section. All the broadcasts are there. You can go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please like and subscribe and share. It definitely helps the ministry. The more you share, the more you like, the more you subscribe on the internet. And if you need information, you want to have, you want to help, you want to volunteer, there's information on the website. If you're moved to support the ministry, there's a support button and a donate button on the website. Feel free to check that out. And if you're interested in just, providing resources, if you have resources that maybe Tammy and I don't know about, to help women and men who have suffered and going through the traumatic pains and stains of abortion, please drop me a line. I'd love to find those, check out those resources and provide them to the listening audience. Tammy, again, thank you so much for being on the program. You are such a blessing, and I hope that the Lord will continue to bless you and move you and use you powerfully to continue to counsel and heal and speak and move the hearts of many through the giftings of the Holy Spirit that He has given you for the redemption and the healing power of Jesus Christ with these traumatic pains and stains. Following this program, if you're listening on the radio, on KDKR or KRTM networks, if you're listening in Florida, or if you follow on the podcasts, I'm interviewing Seth Gruber from the White Rose Resistance. He is a powerful man of the Lord who is very passionate about saving the unborn and being a voice for the voiceless. That program is PG-13. It is not suitable for children. It is a little bit more graphic. It goes into the history of abortion. It goes into the demonic swaying of men and the creeping in of the church that has happened that has allowed this, current state that we're in America of secular modernism that has caused the secular moral revolution. Again, that's PG-13, and it is something that I want you to be aware of. If you are easily traumatized or maybe even triggered from certain words and things that occur with talking about abortion and the abortion process, it's definitely probably not a program for you, but it's impactful, it is intense, it is fast-paced, and it's very informative, and it does come with a revival at the end. So if you're interested in listening to that will be airing right after this program, coming up on this following Monday on KDKR and KRTM. This was a word from the wire, and until next time, everybody, God bless.